Hello and welcome to BYJU'S Exam Prep IAS. Welcome to today's daily quiz segment with us, where we shall be discussing certain questions that have been picked from ongoing current affairs for 23rd February 2024. So let us look at the first question on your screen, and here we have a set of three statements which all broadly talk about certain military exercises. Now, why does this question become so important today? That is because of an article from the Economic Times that talks about how Coast Guard ships from India, Maldives, Sri Lanka, they are all teaming up. They are reaching for conducting certain multilateral exercises. And in that regard, the question here says, the first statement, exercise Mitra Shakti is a bilateral, it is a two-way military exercise between India and Indonesia. The statement is incorrect, evidently because exercise Mitra Shakti is in fact a bilateral joint military exercise between militaries of India on the one hand and Sri Lanka on the other. Now let's remember, the exercise is critical to both the countries because it involves sharing interoperability, it involves sharing operational experience. In fact, in the 2023 edition, we also saw participations of several unmanned aerial vehicles, including that of drones. So the first statement here is invalid. Looking at the second statement, it says India and Maldives have been conducting joint military exercise known as equivalent, and this has been happening between them since 2009. Well, this statement is valid. It is a correct statement because the word equivalent, it means in Maldivian language friendship or camaraderie between two friendly countries, and hence this exercise has been conducted since 2009. It is typically a 4-day event that is held alternately between India and Maldives. And hence the second statement here is correct. Now talking about the third statement, this has been picked up from news because this was the exercise that we were actually pointing out to back as we saw the article from the Economic Times. It says the Dosti trilateral exercise is a biennial Coast Guard drill, a set of maneuvers that includes India, Sri Lanka and Thailand. So here we know that Thailand is incorrect because this exercise that we are calling as Dosti, rather friendship in English, was initiated initially back in 1991 between Indian and Maldivian Coast Guards. Let's remember that it was in 2012 that Sri Lanka chose to join the exercise. Now this is a very interesting initiative because it is multi-sectoral. It is not just about focusing on drills with each other's best practices. It is also about training to handle sea accidents, training to handle situations like oil spills, as well as controlling marine pollution. So hence, it has a much broader perspective in mind. In the last 10 years, both, in fact, all the three parties have been able to develop certain mutually benefiting policies with regards to taking care of all the environmental as well as marine problems, and in that regard we know that the third statement is again invalid. So here just the second statement was right, and then B becomes your valid answer. With this, the second question again is a set of two statements. It talks about G20, once again in the news. Last year because India was presiding, this year because some other country is presiding. But as we know that the leadership is done by a troika, a group of three members, the present, the future and the past. India does have a very critical role to play in the G20 agenda even in 2024. In that regard, the first statement here, the G20 was founded in 1999 after the Asian financial crisis. It became a platform, a forum for finance ministers and central bank governors to discuss global economic and financial problems. Indeed, it is a valid statement because yes, back in 1999, G20 or the Group of 20 was formed as an intergovernmental platform comprising about 19 sovereign nations plus the European Union. Now, the purpose was that it was created back in the wake of severe Asian financial crisis. Let's also remember that the G20 represents a major global GDP. It represents major developing nations of the world, including some developed ones, which means it represents a massive geographical area of the world and as well as a major portion of global population. So in that case, let's remember they also talk about certain other agendas such as climate change and sustainable development. The first statement is valid. Second statement about G20 says during its 2023 summit, Vietnam joined G20 as its 21st member. Agreed that in 2023, when India was presiding over G20, there was a set of countries which had become a new member of G20, but it was not Vietnam. Remember, Vietnam, Philippines, Pakistan are typically countries which we do not associate with G20. So in this case, actually the country which joined G20 in September 2023 as announced by the Honorable Indian PM was African Union. Now that had joined as the 21st member of G20. Hence, the second statement becomes invalid. Only A, or the first statement here, is correct. With regards to why did this news become prominent, again, there was a publication in the Economic Times which says that India should become exporter of green energy by 2047 to attract more and more capital, more and more investment, more FDI. This was said by G20 Sherpa, Mr. Amitabh Kant, while addressing the Raisina dialogue that is going on currently in New Delhi, which we know is an annual event that is conducted by India to discuss important geopolitical, geo-economic issues, and hence it is believed that India could be a major player in green energy. Now to the third question for the day. It is again a set of two statements and they are regarding India's space missions. And yes, we are talking about Chandrayaan. Why? The question is gaining prominence. The question comes in the wake of an Economic Times publication which says first United States moon lander in the last 52 years has touched down the surface of the moon, but it is not able to, however, send promising signals. Signal is very, very wobbly. Signal is not very certain, but still, it's a major feat that it has actually touched down the lunar surface. So let's remember, we are entering an era where majority of private companies are now taking over the task of sending space explorations, lunar missions. And in this regard, the question here, the first statement tells you, Jawahar Point, or the Jawahar Sthal as we call it in Hindi, is the site near Shackleton crater where the moon impact probe, the MIP of Chandrayaan-1 had hard landed on the surface of the moon back in 2008. It is a correct statement because talking about Chandrayaan-1, it was India's first lunar probe under the Chandrayaan program. Remember, it was launched by ISRO back in 2008 and it continued to be operational until 2009. We studied this thoroughly in science back then because it included an impactor as well as an orbiter. Hence, the first statement here is valid about Chandrayaan-1. Now, let's also remember that this Shackleton crater that's often spoken about is a crater that is situated in the South Pole, near the South Pole of the moon. It is distinctive. It is known by a very unusual topography that the peaks of the crater, they receive continuous sunlight, whereas the interior part of the crater is perpetually, it is always in the dark, it's in the shadow area. And hence the first statement is valid. Second statement, the Shiv Shakti point, which was recently in the news, is the landing site of Chandrayaan-3, the third lunar mission of Indian Space Research Organization. Once again, this is a valid statement. Now, very fondly, the Indian Prime Minister had given the name Shiv Shakti Point. Indeed, to the spot where to the spot on the lunar surface where Chandrayaan-3 lander had successfully touched the lunar surface after a 40-day difficult journey in the space. Right? So the both statements here become valid, making C as your correct answer. And now let's jump off to the fourth question. It talks about an industrial process. This is known as the SMR, steam methane reforming. Now, steam methane reforming is it's a very well-known industrial process, but it is used in the production of which of the following? A, is it plastic polymer? B, is it ceramic? C, is it hydrogen? Or is it D, dry ice? That's often referred to as dry carbon dioxide. Often a very important source of storing medical utilities. In that case here, which do you think would be the right answer? Here, C is the valid answer, because when we talk about the SMR process, let's remember that this is a very well-known industrial process in which methane from natural gas is heated with steam. That's why the name SMR. This is often done in the presence of a catalyst. A catalyst often enables the reaction to take place. Now what happens? The result is it makes or it creates a mix of carbon monoxide plus hydrogen, which then later on is used as a fuel. So here C is the correct answer. The reason why we are talking about this process in the first place is the article in the Hindu pertaining to ecology, which says that Vietnam aims to produce about 1 to 5 lakh tons of hydrogen a year by 2030. Now, this is not just important for the sake of Vietnam, also when you talk about India and the persistent efforts of the Indian government to bring down their nationally determined contributions, their carbon footprint by 2030. We often talk about grey hydrogen, blue hydrogen, green hydrogen. We know how Indian government has been focusing on the creation of green ammonia and green hydrogen. In fact, it is also soon to become a major exporter of this. Clean energy fuels, which could boost our vehicle segment, which could boost our industrial segment, and yet would have no dangerous side effects on the climate as compared to conventional sources of energy like coal and petrol, kerosene. So it's a very important topic really. Now let's check out the PYQ of the day, and this has been picked up from 2015. It says that BOLGARD 1 and BOLGARD 2 technologies are mentioned in the context of which of the following? A, clonal propagation of crop plants. B, developing genetically modified crop plants, the GM plants. Is it C, production of plant growth substances, or is it D, production of biofertilizers? Now here the correct answer is B. It is used in the context of genetically modified crops or the GM crops. Now when we talk about the BOLGARD 1 and BOLGARD 2, let's remember that India had actually given permission to BOLGARD 1 back in 2002 itself. Much later to BOLGARD 2. What are these? Now these are genetically modified crops which have an inbuilt capacity. They can generate a protein synthesis which will protect them from getting infected from very popular pest known as the bollworm. And hence it becomes a situation where you are giving a natural inbuilt immunity specifically to plants like cotton to fight infections like bollworm, which leads to massive devastation of crops every year. So in this regard, let's also talk about the BT cotton. And hence, B here will be the valid answer. Now let's proceed with the fact of the day. So for today's interesting fact, we are talking about cooperative societies because they are in the news. Now recently, the Honorable Prime Minister has congratulated Amul Dairy Cooperative, as being a very, very successful model, generating employment for millions, revolutionizing India's dairy industry. Remember, it was created back as Operation Flood, when huge changes happened in India's milking sector, also often referred to as the White Revolution or the Milk Revolution. So in that regard, we are talking about the cooperative societies. Now, let's remember cooperative societies are often referred to as voluntary organizations or civil organizations because they are so easy and so simple to be created. They are made by people themselves in order to facilitate certain motive. Say, for example, you can have a housing cooperative, you can have fertilizer cooperative, farmer cooperative, you can have consumer cooperative, housing cooperative, and you can talk about producer cooperative. So people themselves come into an association to enable their interests in a more systematic way. But for a cooperative society to be functional, remember, it is a legal entity. It has to get registered under the Cooperative Societies Act 1912. Now, members of cooperative, typically they raise their money, their capital from among themselves. In Hindi, it is often referred to as sahakar. Sahakar means about cooperatives. Now, therefore, a cooperative is a rather autonomous, independent organization of people who meet willingly. They are completely on a voluntary basis and they try to meet certain common economic, social, sometimes even political, cultural, religious requirements. It enables them a democratic platform to raise their voice. Now, Ministry of Cooperation was one such initiative that was taken by the Indian government back in 2021 when Shri Amit Shah became the first head of the Ministry of Cooperation, a separate ministry to take care of cooperative societies in India. The ministry provides a separate administration policy framework to strengthen the culture of cooperatives in a country like India, where on the one hand population is massive, on the other hand people often complain about loopholes in administration, and therefore civil society groups are an excellent alternative in this situation to meet their necessities. Now, the ministry's creation was announced back in 2021 with a vision statement known as Sahakar Se Samriddhi. This means getting prosperity and success through the culture of cooperatives. Now, because of the sheer importance to cooperatives in Indian society, there have been certain constitutional changes too. Let's remember the 97th Amendment Act of 2011. It added a new part to the Constitution, Part 9B, regarding cooperative societies in India. Similarly, the word cooperatives was added. It was adopted as a part of Article 19(1). We often speak about freedom, right to freedom of movement, right to form associations, right to form unions, and now there is also a right to form cooperatives as a fundamental right, Part 3 of the Indian Constitution, corresponding to Article 9(1)(c). Similarly, this is now propagated to the extent that we often talk about multi-state cooperative societies. Now, let's remember, although cooperatives are typically registered within a state, but sometimes the members of a cooperative society can expand across many states together. They might have similar interests, but they are not in the same state. In that case, we talk about a culture of multi-state cooperative, where, despite the fact that cooperative is a state subject, some cooperatives expand their membership through many states. Now, a very good example here could be when we talk about the sugar and the milk industry, sometimes banking, whose members are in more than one state. So recently there was an amendment to the Cooperative Societies Act, and this happened as late as 2022, where the government has decided to further merge the existing cooperative societies, which are now not very successful. They are sick units. They are loss-making units. They will merge them together and again finance them so that they can reinitiate them. Similarly, the government has also spoken about propagating a culture of multi-state cooperative. Now, certain cooperative societies such as the IFCO is very popular in India because they talk about one of the largest cooperatives that we know of in terms of farmer fertilizers, and hence cooperatives could pave a way for a much more equal, much more democratic and participative society, a topic that's very critical to your GS Paper 2 Social Justice as well as GS Paper 3 Economics. And on that note, I shall take your leave for today's segment, thanking you for being with us. Hope you enjoyed the segment and see you soon with another same interesting one. Thank you.